halls of West Virginia resound with the sound of Golden Blue football.
Almost heaven, West Virginia.
Now let's bring on the Mountaineers. Goes around about the 50, the 10, the 5. A touchdown, West Virginia. He did it.
He did it. Patrick White. Touchdown, Tavon Austin.
But Don Nehlen's Mountaineers enjoy walking in where angels feared to tread.
I think you think that these guys are going to fall over dead for you. Well, I got news for you. They're going to punch you right in the mouth. It's Mountaineer pride.
Nothing cheap, nothing dirty, but West Virginia football. West Virginia football.
Leave no doubt tonight. They shouldn't have played the old Golden Blue. Not this night.
They've done it. They've done it. A perfect season.
And the Mountaineers, for the first time in history, undefeated and untied.
Don Nehlen and his Mountaineers, for the second time, have finished a regular season with an unblemished mark.
Ain't no stopping the Golden Blue.
And now recorded from the CRW studios in Almost Heaven, West Virginia, it's the Country Roads webcast with your host, Jordan Cruz.
What's going on, Mountaineer Nation? Welcome back into the CRW podcast here for episode 205 in season 7. Yes, West Virginia's off this week, but still going to hit you with a little bye week babble, and we're going to preview and make my picks for the upcoming Big 12 games this week. But before we do that, obviously not going to bury the elephant in the room. We got some news to talk about here on the WVU football side that's been major this week. During the bye week, of course, they're back at the beginning on Tuesday. West Virginia announced the firing of defensive coordinator Jordan Lesley. Jeff Koonz will serve as the interim defensive coordinator throughout the remainder of the season in the final 4 games here coming up after the bye week. So we got to talk about that to begin the episode. But then here to just discuss on the bye week, I want to get into some player grades. You know, last bye week we did a little bye week babble where we talked more about the stats at that point in the season. We'll touch on the stats again at the end of the season. I want to use this bye week to talk about grades. So I've got the top 5 highest grades for offense so far this season from PFF, top 5 highest grades on defense this season so far from PFF. And then I'm going to talk about some struggle spots, some struggle areas on both offense and defense. And then we'll talk about where West Virginia ranks highly in the Big 12 as far as team grades are concerned, and where they rank in the bottom of the Big 12 as far as team grades are concerned. And then, like I said, always get to the Big 12 preview, talk about the matchups this week, and take a look at the standings as they sit currently with the Mountaineers on a bye week before they face Cincinnati, who's also on a bye week. But as I said, let's not bury the lead here. Let's talk about West Virginia moving on from Jordan Lesley as defensive coordinator, something that I think a lot of the members of Mountaineer Nation have cried for a year or two now at this point, and West Virginia finally answers those calls. I'm going to share this article on the screen for those of you watching the video version, which appreciate you guys tuning in to the video version. They're on YouTube or maybe on WVSportsNow.com. Appreciate them for hosting the episodes, or appreciate you listening to the audio version. You can find any podcast platform, Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, you name it. Just search Country Roads Webcast. If you listen to us on that audio side, leave us a rating. That helps us a lot. Jeff Koonz replaces Jordan Lesley as DC at West Virginia from Adam Rittenberg here on ESPN. Not going to read through this entire article. But we do want to get Neil Brown's statement here. I met with Coach Lesley this morning and informed him that we are making a change at the defensive coordinator position. Coach Neil Brown said in a statement, "These decisions are never easy, but I'm confident this change is in the best interest of our program and puts us in the best position to finish strong. Jeff Koonz will step up and serve as defensive coordinator moving forward. I know he and our entire staff will do everything they can to help us succeed." The Mountaineers are 45th nationally in points allowed. We're also, 100 and low hundreds in pass yards given up on the season as well. We've allowed 99 points in their past 3 games. I'm not going to read through all this, but I did want to point out this at the end because this is interesting detail here. Obviously, Jeff Koonz taken over as defensive coordinator. He's done a great job with the linebackers, back-to-back seasons. Special teams has been great this year as well. Koonz has served West Virginia's inside linebackers and special teams coordinator since 2020 under Neil Brown, but he last held a defensive coordinator title. He was co-defensive coordinator at where? Cincinnati in 2016, and the Mountaineers, when they return from their bye week, the first game that Jeff Koonz will serve as a coordinator for West Virginia, he will face Cincinnati on the road there. So interesting, that's a full circle moment for him, I'm sure. He had a co-defensive coordinator title there in 2016, and then now here he is 8 years later getting to run a defense here in the final 4 games of the season, and he plays that same Cincinnati team. So wanted to share that. And of course, I'll provide my thoughts here in a bit, but I did also want to share this one from mentioned WVSportsNow.com, and they host our episodes on their site, which we are so thankful for. But really wanted to share this also from Mike Osti here. A great article, what he talks about clearing up any confusion about the firing of Jordan Lesley. So just some of the minute details. And I know a lot of people were asking about Shadon Brown as well. And he kind of mentions this, and I want to share my thoughts on that side of it also, because West Virginia's secondary obviously has been the issue. But clearing up any confusion about WVU football firing Jordan Lesley, Mike Osti mentions here, this is stuff that he's been able to confirm. It was Neil Brown's decision to part ways with Lesley. I've seen others confirm that as well. Didn't come down from Ren Baker. Neil Brown made this move. So obviously, that's, I guess, a positive in Neil Brown's corners that, he kept seeing these struggles on defense and was still, able to recognize that and, humble himself and say, hey, I know Jordan Lesley may be a friend of mine or whatever, but we got to do something to make a defensive change if we want to finish out strong after this bye week in these final 4 games of the season. So, tip your cap to him for that. Got to give him credit when he makes, a decision that we've all been hoping to see him make and hoping to see the university make. Brown previously fought to keep Lesley in the defensive stack intact after West Virginia endured a rough 2022 season. The decision to fire Lesley was in the works for multiple weeks, and the bye week was viewed as the right timing if the defense did not improve. That means the defense had to perform no matter if the Mountaineers won as a team. So I'm thinking, back to the previous bye week, maybe it could have happened, but you had that really good performance against Oklahoma State that maybe gave him, a little bit new life. But then, of course, by the time this one rolled around, that had already, fallen off. WVU Director of Athletics Ren Baker and Brown talk frequently, and any reports that Brown was forced to do this by Baker are false. So yet again, confirming this was Neil Brown's decision. The decision to promote Jeff Koonz instead of Shadon Brown likely signals the writing being on the wall for Shadon Brown, which is what I wanted to dive into here also. Obviously, Shadon Brown, coaching the secondary. The pass coverage has been, the main issue of the defense and one of the worst pass defenses in the nation this year, not only in the Big 12. We've seen the bad, parts of that, and I'll talk more about that when we talk about the grades here in a minute when we get to that portion of the episode here. But Shadon Brown, leading that secondary, it's twofold bad for him because not only did West Virginia make a decision this offseason to go, hire Victor Cabral, which I think has paid off well, coaching the now Spur position, formerly the Bandits. Tyron Bradley's performed well and graded out really well this season also. That's been a good move, but the bad side of that move has been not hiring another, coach to fill in as a safeties coach once Dante Wright moved on, and just kind of having Jordan Lesley oversee the secondary and having Shadon Brown just as a whole entire secondary coach. I know Javon Codlin helps there some, but, having Shadon Brown have the only title of secondary coach, the main assistant that has that, this all is going to fall on him with the pass defense performing as badly as it has. And he was, co-defensive coordinator was part of his title, co-defensive coordinator and secondary coach. So the fact that you fire Jordan Lesley, you would assume, okay, the co-defensive coordinator is going to take over there. The fact that doesn't happen speaks to what Mike's talking about here on WVSportsNow.com, that it may signal the writing being on the wall for Shadon Brown. Because in my opinion, the only reason that he's probably not gone is because West Virginia probably doesn't want to try and fire 2 coaches at the exact same time. One, monetarily, that might be a tough issue for them. And then also, it's just not something WVU does a lot. We talk about, when we're talking about Neil Brown, I've been talking about his job status in the past. I always mention the WVU just doesn't really fire coaches mid-season. They've never really done that. And that's even been true for assistants as well. You've heard people talk about, when talking about this move with fire Jordan Lesley, that, in 30, 40 plus years, they don't remember West Virginia ever making a mid-season change to a major position on the staff, a coordinator, and of course definitely not a head coach either. So kind of an unprecedented situation here, and West Virginia maybe didn't want to do 2 at once when they were doing it for one of the first times that they've ever made a move like this. But I think that for Shadon Brown, in his case, could the writing still already be on the wall? Maybe he already knows that, but it also could be a case of, hey, we're going to switch out, Jordan Lesley. We're going to have a new voice leading the defense, and we're going to see, is that the issue, or is, are you leading the secondary the issue? This back half of the season, these final 4 games is going to give you a chance to show, hey, I wasn't the problem maybe. But maybe it's already decided maybe Shadon Brown will be gone. Would not be surprised if that's the case, but I'm also not surprised if this could be a trial period for him to see if he was part of the problem or not, and then they'll make their decision at the end of the season. Of course, they just didn't want to do two at once. Those are probably the two scenarios we're looking at with Shadon Brown. And then, same goes for Jeff Koonz. If we're talking about tryouts, he's interim DC, but if the defense takes a big leap up, they could look at him to, promote to full-time defensive coordinator. We know Neil Brown likes to promote from in-house, so it's not something that we could rule out. And then the last couple of bullet points here, the expectation is no decision about Neil Brown's future will take place until the end of the season, as we all kind of expected. The expectation is also that Neil Brown will remain on as head coach barring a collapse in the final 4 games, which I think that this move kind of signifies as well, is just the fact that unless West Virginia makes this move and then struggles and goes, 0-4, 1-3, maybe even 2-2, then you might have to worry about Neil Brown's status. But if West Virginia, they make this move, they win 3 games, they win 4 games, here are the final 4, then obviously they're going to keep Neil Brown. So, you're looking at, if you go 7-5, you go 8-4, Neil Brown's probably good. 6-6, maybe you're questionable, but I'd say you're still in there. So unless West Virginia goes, I'd say 1-3 in these final 4 games, or hopefully not, knock on wood, 0-4. Neil Brown is probably going to be back next season, and he's just hopefully making some changes to try and improve some things. And we obviously see steps towards that already here with this move away from Jordan Lesley, which obviously we had to cover here at the beginning of the bye-week babble episode here for 205 on the Country Roads webcast. But now that we've touched on that a little bit, let's get into the grades that I wanted to talk about here. These I've got from PFF, obviously. Like I said, last off week, we talked a little bit about the stats at that point in the season. But now we're going to talk about grades because we're, nearly done with the season now. Only 4 games left, sitting 4-4 on the year. These grades have a little bit good sample size, and in these, I only included players with a minimum of 50 snaps when I'm talking about these grades that I'm about to get into here, which we're going to talk individual grades here first. Offensive grade and then defensive grade. And I went and got the top 5 highest grades on offense for West Virginia players thus far this season from PFF with a minimum of 50 snaps. And we've got at number 5, Thomas Remack, 72.3. At number 4, Nick Malone, 73.1. Garrett Green at number 3 with 80.7. And then the most surprising one here in the top 5, and let alone being as high as number 2 for me, Jack Samarco, who, I put the qualifier in minimum 50 snaps. If I would have done 100, he probably wouldn't have qualified. He's played 60 snaps on the season, but he's also played in 7 of 8 games, and he's a true freshman, guys, with an 85.8 overall offensive grade for Jack Samarco. And then, of course, the highest graded player on West Virginia's offense comes as no surprise. He's been one of the highest graded offensive linemen throughout the entire season in all of college football, not only the Big 12, and that's Wyatt Milam, who has a 92.1 offensive grade on the season. So at this point in the season, those are West Virginia's top 5 highest graded players as far as offensive grade is concerned there, according to PFF. And then on defense here, same case, highest graded players as far as defensive grade is concerned there on PFF with a minimum of 50 snaps on the season. Josiah Trotter at number 5 with a 70.4 grade. Obviously leads the Mountaineers in tackles on the season, has 58 total, if I'm not mistaken. Reed Carrico, 73.0 grade there on the defensive side. Obviously has been great filling in. West Virginia been playing 3 linebackers at time because, Lathan, Trotter, and Carrico have shown to be some of the best players on that defense. Fatorma Mulba at number 3 with a 75.5 defensive grade on the season, and he's really started to show out in the past few weeks as well, and he's been a great standout there at that nose tackle spot. And I mentioned, when I was talking about the coaching changes, that I think that bringing in Victor Cabral actually was a good move because the bandit position hadn't been getting the production that it had been at Troy for Neil Brown. They changed it. They bring in Victor Cabral. They changed the name of it even. It's the spur position now, and you have been getting more production out of that position this season as Tyron Bradley is the number 2 graded player on West Virginia's entire defense, according to PFF, with a 75.7 grade. And then the only player with an 80-plus grade on defense is West Virginia's highest graded player, and it probably comes as no surprise that it's TJ Jackson with an 85.7 grade. But as we talked about West Virginia's defensive struggles, everyone else on West Virginia's defense has lower than a 70 grade there, according to PFF, with the exception being Eddie V, who, of course, only played 46 snaps on the season before his injury, but he did have a 72.3 grade prior to that. So you kind of see the defensive struggles there with the grades. Not too many people above 80, as only TJ Jackson's there, and then most of your defense is below 70 grade besides the other players there that are in the top 5 that we talked about. But, do got to shout out Tyron Bradley in the spur position. I think getting Victor Cabral, good move, but maybe just having one man oversee the secondary proved to be, a fatal move for West Virginia this year, as the pass defense has been the biggest issue for the West Virginia defense and the West Virginia team's, main struggle here as they're at 4-4 going into this bye week, 3-2 in Big 12 play. And I want to talk a little bit about struggle spots now as well. Struggle spots on offense here as we continue to talk about individual PFF grades at this point in the season in our bye week babble episode. The struggle spots on offense, surprisingly, really the main one that I was able to look at here, I think, is run blocking. West Virginia's run grade, I think, is 10th overall as far as team run grades are concerned in the Big 12, so lower than you would expect. And West Virginia's offensive line hasn't been bad, particularly in pass blocking. Everyone on West Virginia's offensive line has a pass grade of 71 plus. But when you look at the run blocking grades, there are four different players on your offensive line there. So everyone besides Wyatt Milam has a run grade below 70, actually. And, like I said, every player on West Virginia's offensive line has a pass block grade of 71 plus, but every offensive lineman, save for the great Wyatt Milam, has a run blocking grade below 70. You've got Brandon Yates with a 67 run block grade on the season. Nick Malone, 69.4 run blocking grade on the season, but he's been great grades overall, great grades pass blocking. And then same goes for Thomas Remack, who's graded out highly, but his lowest grade and lowest category is run blocking with a 69.7 grade. The lowest graded offensive lineman on the season, I know we've seen Brandon Yates struggle with the snap issues, but he's actually not graded out as bad as the right guard, unfortunately. Jaquay Hubbard, 56.6 overall offensive grade, and also only a 54.2 run blocking grade. So the lowest there of what's been a struggle area for West Virginia is run blocking, but does have nearly a 69 pass blocking grade, so not as bad there. West Virginia has done a good job pass blocking this season. Funny enough, the run blocking grades are where they struggle in PFF there. As far as struggle spots there on the offense at this point in the season, still a chance to improve on those grades here in the final four games. We'll see how they do improve on that, and hopefully we do see some movement there. As far as defense, the struggle spot, obviously, that we're going to talk about, no surprise, pass coverage. Like I said, that's been the issue on defense this season. The lowest grades in pass coverage for the Mountaineers are defensive backs. When you look at West Virginia's coverage grades, the highest graded player in pass coverage is someone I talked about there when I was talking about the addition of Victor Cabral in the spur position, Tyron Bradley. He grades out as the highest graded player for West Virginia in pass coverage with a 68.5. West Virginia doesn't have a defensive back with a coverage grade of 51 plus, save for one person, and that's Dantes Fagan is the only cornerback with a coverage grade above 51. 67.0 coverage grade for Dantes Fagan on the season. Your other corners, Garnett Hollis has a 46.7 grade, Jacoby Spells 48.1, Aiden Guards 49.5, and TJ Crandall 50.5. Funny enough, a comment that Neil Brown made in the offseason may ring true on, potential best coverage guy being Rodney Gallagher, because we haven't seen Rodney Gallagher play on defense much in the past few weeks. They've really needed to count on him on offense as he's become a starter there and someone they've targeted a good bit, but he still has the second best coverage grade on the entire team with a 68.1. So Rodney Gallagher, one of the higher coverage grades there. So that's the individual portion of it. I'm going to flip over to the other side of my notes here. And I want to talk about the team grades, kind of where West Virginia sits in the Big 12. And then we will get ready to wrap up this bye week episode by looking around the Big 12, closing out with our Around the Big 12 segment, as we always like to do, making our picks for the upcoming week's games in the Big 12 Conference. Despite the Mountaineers being a bye week, I'll still make my picks here. And then we will look at the Big 12 standings before we wrap up this episode. But as far as West Virginia's grades as a team and where they sit in the Big 12, like I said, I'm not going to run through every category here, but I did want to note a couple on each side of the ball here as far as team grades are concerned, according to PFF, within the Big 12 Conference, because West Virginia has a couple kind of best and worsts here. On the defensive side, obviously, the worst one is they are number 16, of course, dead last in the Big 12 in pass coverage. And I believe they are near the bottom, if not at the bottom, in the NCAA in PFF pass coverage grade. But West Virginia has a 38.6 coverage grade as a team this season at this point. Like I said, dead last in the Big 12, but not only is it dead last, but it's dead last by a long shot. Every other team in the conference, so you're talking 15 through 1, has at least a team pass coverage grade of 53 plus, and West Virginia sits at a 38.6. So obviously you can see that's one thing that leads to the firing of Jordan Lesley and the status of Shadon Brown being up in the air, being the secondary coach, and also being co-defensive coordinator, and why he isn't the one that's promoted and why it's going to be Jeff Koonz. West Virginia also 14th out of 16 teams in the Big 12 in team defense grade with a 68.3. So those are, the worst of West Virginia as far as, grades through the Big 12 here, according to BFF. But there are a couple best for West Virginia. Let's look on the positive side here a little bit, get a little optimistic here as West Virginia does head into the bye week after a win 4 up, 4 down, and then have 4 games left on the season. So still could have a positive close. So we can still throw our gold and blue glasses on at times because there are areas where West Virginia has succeeded this season, and a couple of those have been on the defensive side. Funny enough, West Virginia has a couple categories there where they have been great, and they are number 1 in the Big 12 in team rushing defensive grade at 86.6, very high rushing defense grade there. And you can look at that and say, obviously, that's because teams want to pass on West Virginia because the pass defense has been so abysmal, and that is true. But also, West Virginia has done a good job, when teams have tried to run the football, even with good running backs. They've held a few good running backs in check this season, so they have done a good job as far as rushing defense is concerned. And they've done a good job not, allowing too many people to miss, force them into missed tackles. West Virginia, number 1 in the conference in tackling grade as well at a 78.7. So there's a couple bests and a couple worsts for West Virginia as where they sit as far as this point in the season. Team grades in the Big 12 there, according to PFF, after we went over some individual grades. And that's just kind of what I wanted to talk about here for the bye week babble. Like I said, last bye week, we got into where West Virginia's stats were kind of this point in the season. This time, I wanted to get into a little bit more of where the grades sit at, according to PFF, at this point in the season for West Virginia, both, some individual standouts, some struggle points there individually, and then, of course, a little bit of both there as far as team grades are concerned across the Big 12. And speaking of across the Big 12, that leads us to getting into our final segment here that we like to wrap up the show with always. That's our Around the Big 12 segment here. Let's take a look around the conference here. Coming up already, first week of November, obviously the most important month of the college football season, where then you start to determine who's going to play in conference title games, who's going to be playoff contenders, all of that stuff still up in the air in a Big 12 conference here, where we want to look at the standings first, and then we will look at the matchups this week and get into my picks of who I think will win some of these games coming up this Saturday. But where the standings sit heading into this week, BYU 8-0 overall, 5-0 in Big 12 play. Iowa State also remains unbeaten on the season, 7-0 overall, 4-0 in Big 12 conference play. Kansas State at number 3, 7-1, 4-1. Colorado right there also with a 4-1 conference record, 6-2 overall on the season. And then you get into a big slew of teams right here that have similar conference records at 3-2, with Texas Tech, Cincinnati, TCU, and West Virginia all at 3-2 in the conference. And the good part of that for West Virginia is they play both Texas Tech at Cincinnati, so West Virginia has a chance to leap up these conference standings at the end of the season. Keep that in mind as they do face Texas Tech and Cincinnati here, who are also sitting at 3-2 in the conference. Texas Tech, Cincinnati, and TCU all 5-3 overall in the season. West Virginia at 4-4. Arizona State at 9th in the conference standings is 5-2 overall in the season, but both of those losses coming in conference, so they're only 2-2. That's why they sit below the other teams there. Then you get into kind of the bottom portion of the conference here at 10 through 16. Baylor at 2-3, 4-4 overall, but they've really improved in recent weeks and seem to be kind of hitting their stride, and that might be an interesting matchup to watch when the Mountaineers play them here in a few weeks. Houston at number 11 in the conference standings, 3-5 overall, 2-3 in the conference, and Utah 1-4 overall, 4-4 1-4 in the conference, 4-4 overall. As we did predict something right here in the CRW, and that was Utah not coming into this conference dominating, and it being kind of quite the opposite experience for them. UCF 1-4, 3-5 overall, another team that West Virginia plays here in the back half of the season. Arizona 1-4 at number 14 and 3-5 overall. Kansas 1-4 and 2-6, but probably the best 2-6 team you'll ever see. They've had a lead in I think every game they've played in the season except for maybe one, and they've had late leads at that as well, and they've just had late season collapses all throughout the year. It's been a tough go for Kansas. Oklahoma State, same can be said for them, sitting at the bottom of the conference standings, 0-5, still looking for the first conference win, and 3-5 overall. But they did give the top team a run for their money in BYU, who needed a late scoring drive, and that just goes to show you the balance of this Big 12 league and how anything can happen on any given week within this conference, as the team that's in dead last nearly beat the undefeated team that's in first place here. So you never know what can happen in the Big 12 this year, which is a great segue into our Around the Big 12 segment, where we'll try and predict what may happen this week as I throw out some picks here. You never know how these are going to go, though. Sometimes I feel pretty confident in them. Sometimes I'm like, I have no idea what's going to happen in some of these games, but we'll get into it. No early games this week. Really doesn't start until the 3:30 slate here on Saturday, November 2nd. Mountaineers on an off week. A couple other teams are as well, including Cincinnati, that the Mountaineers play following the bye week. But we'll lead it off here with Texas Tech and Iowa State at 3:30 on ESPN in Ames. I think this is an interesting matchup because if Texas Tech can find a way to score, we could see what could happen there. But I don't know. On the road, I like Iowa State to be able to slow Texas Tech's offense down and be able to score. We've seen Iowa State do it in different ways this season, whether it's, passing offense or, running the football as they had to do in their most recent kind of come from behind win there where Rocco Becht ran the football for, I think, 97 yards, including the game-winning touchdown. And he's found a great way to get it done. And it seems like Iowa State's just a team that's going to continue to get it done. So I think this could be a game that ends up being close, but I like Iowa State to outlast Texas Tech. I'm going to go with the Cyclones to get the win there to begin the segment here. And then we got Kansas State hitting the road to take on Houston, who you just, as a club, you don't know what you're going to get, week to week from Houston. 3:30 there on Fox. Houston's a team that's beaten some teams you didn't expect them to beat, but then also sometimes you see them and you're like, that's a team that's, going to be one of the worst teams in the conference. Like I said, you never know what you're going to get here, a mixed bag from the Cougars, but they're playing at home. They have that advantage at 3:30 there. Primetime game there on Fox. Kansas State hitting the road. Can Houston slow them down? I don't think they'll be able to do enough to do it. I think Kansas State wins this one. You're looking at maybe 14 points, but maybe Houston can keep it within 7 to 10. I think Kansas by double digits, though, in this one, Kansas State by double digits. In this one, the Wildcats get the win there at 3:30 as well. Then we have Arizona and UCF, two teams there as we went over the Big 12 standings near the bottom. UCF needing a win here, and I think that they'll find a way to do it at home. I'm just going to go ahead and lay that out there. I think at 3:30, playing at the Bounce House on FS1, we're going to see UCF outlast Arizona. Find a way to slow down McMillan. Even if you allow McMillan to get his, sometimes you can find a way to win, as West Virginia learned. McMillan goes over 200 plus for West Virginia. We found a way to win. UCF, hopefully they can do something similar. I think they'll be able to run the football. I think that I'll give UCF the victory here over Arizona at home at 3:30. Which then brings us to kind of the evening slate here. Like I said, a few teams on off weeks, so only two more games here left in the conference. We have Arizona State and Oklahoma State here at 7 in Stillwater on FS1. Interesting matchup here. Arizona State 5-2 on the season, but both losses coming in conference, so they're not very high in the conference standings right now. But if they could find a way to continue to win in the back half of the season, they could see their way up that ladder. Whereas Oklahoma State's a team that looks a little rejuvenated after that bye week. Like I said, gave BYU all they could handle, but they're desperate for a conference win. And I just cannot see, Mike Gundy continuing to lose and remain winless in the Big 12 much longer. So, despite Oklahoma State not getting it done this season, I've, tried to ride Gundy and say that he's going to get it done, multiple times this year, and I've been wrong. Maybe this is the time I'm finally correct on that. I think playing at home, night game here late in the season in November, Arizona State coming in, long way for them to travel. I think that Oklahoma State finds a way to finally win their first conference game. Give me Gundy, get right game here in Stillwater at 7 o'clock there on FS1. And then the final game here, we're going to call it our game of the week because of the rivalry here aspect to it. And also two teams, kind of right there in the middle portion of that conference, which is really interesting right now in kind of the shakeup as we went through the standings there and saw all the teams kind of bundled there at the middle with kind of similar records. And two of those teams are TCU and Baylor, of course. This game's always interesting. 8 o'clock kick this year, Eastern time in Waco. It's going to be on ESPN2. I think that Baylor's playing some really good football right now. They started off struggling, but Dave Aranda was a guy with his back against the wall that seems to maybe be turning things around and going in a proper direction. I think Jake Spavital there as offensive coordinator is really working out for them, especially in recent weeks. I think that arguably Sawyer Robertson at quarterback there at Baylor's playing some of the best of any quarterback in the Big 12 right now over the past, couple weeks or so. And so I think that's an interesting advantage for Baylor heading into this game. They get the home field advantage at night. I think I'm going to ride with the Bears over TCU in this one. I think that they're got some momentum right now. And, it's a rivalry game. You never know what's going to happen with that. I think it's going to be close, but I think Baylor's going to outlast them in the end. And I think it's going to be interesting to see where Baylor sits and where West Virginia sits when those two teams play here in the back half of the season, because I think Baylor's kind of finding their stride right now, whereas West Virginia thinks they have a chance to, ride out here and win some games in the late portion of their season as well. So we'll see what happens here moving out as we get into, of course, the most important month of the season here for not only West Virginia, but these other Big 12 teams we've discussed in the Around the Big 12 segment here as we get into the month of November now. Obviously, one of the most important months in, the Big 12 conference and in all of college football, where a lot's going to be decided throughout this month. And that, of course, applies to our West Virginia Mountaineers a lot. And we'll be looking at a lot of different things now moving forward in this back half of the season, as we'll have a new man helming the defense there with Jeff Koonz, and we'll see how much of a difference that makes. Hopefully for West Virginia's sake, it does make a difference, and we can see them, potentially win out. Who knows? We could all be eating crow at the end of the season. West Virginia finish 8-4, go to a bowl game, and have a chance to have a similar record to last season, which, interestingly enough, sitting at 3-2 heading into the bye week, if West Virginia was to find a way to do that, they would actually finish with a better, standing in conference than they did last year, because last year they were 8-4, but they were 6-3 in conference. This year they would be 8-4 and 7-2 in conference if they found a way to do that. So, just something to keep in mind if you want to have those golden blue glasses on, looking at it with an optimistic view throughout the 2024 season. But regardless, I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you tuned into the video version here on YouTube, throw them in the comments, whether it's about how you think West Virginia will finish out this season, Neil Brown's status. Are you happy that it seems like he may be returning? Got reports of that, in the back half of the season here. And of course, we still have several things up in the air as far as injuries are concerned. I didn't want to, cover that too much till we know more about it. We'll know more about it once we get into game week, I think. But several players, of course, with injury status still up in the air. Any thoughts you have on anything there, of course, as well, at the defensive coordinator move. That's something I'm sure a lot of people want to discuss. Anything you got there, we always appreciate those interactions. Just like we appreciate you tuning in this episode any way you choose to do so, whether it is there on YouTube, there through WVSportsNow.com. If you did tune in on the video version there, hit the like button. That helps a ton with that YouTube algorithm. And be sure, subscribe here to the Country Roads Webcast YouTube channel. Come over here for a ton of Mountaineer football coverage throughout the season. And then, of course, moving into the offseason, where we'll be talking, of course, transfer portal, recruiting, and all that. Despite the season only being a few months of the year, we run things 12 months of the year here talking WVU football on the Country Roads Webcast. So we'd really appreciate you coming over here and joining us in for this content. Fast, easy, and free to hit the like and subscribe button, and we'd love for you to do that. But we also appreciate those that tune in on the audio side, which you can find on any podcast platform you like. Like I mentioned earlier, all those, I'm not going to run through them again here, but if you did do that, we appreciate a rating there on that side as well. But I guess that will pretty much wrap up this one. We'll know more about injury status, player status, and we can dive more into that when we get into the Cincinnati preview, which will be coming out early next week, our Cincinnati preview and predictions, as West Virginia will come back from a bye week, and we'll talk about the results from this week's Big 12 games at the top half of that episode as well, before we dive into the Cincinnati preview, as we've shared our thoughts on this upcoming week here in the Big 12 on this episode of the CRW, or at least I have here solo on this one. Brad and Steven out on assignment, but they'll be rejoining me here in the near future as we continue to bring you a couple podcast episodes per week here on the podcast side of things that you find on the audio version and, of course, video version here on YouTube. But as I mentioned, additional content here if you come over to the YouTube that we're dropping in addition to the podcast here, which you'll find a couple of those per week. And didn't want to miss out here and drop one, despite the fact that West Virginia has an off week. We still wanted to come out and deliver an episode on this bye week. So we're titling this one Bye Week Babble, where we talk some, player grades, team grades for Mountaineers at this point in the season. Then, of course, had to cover the elephant in the room there with the coaching staff news for the Mountaineers. But it's been fun creating this one. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed tuning into it as much as I've enjoyed crafting it here for you, and excited to talk about the back half of this season, where we never know what could happen for the Mountaineers here. You can choose to be pessimistic, you can choose to be optimistic about it, but either way, I think we're all rooting for success for WVU, and would love to see them succeed in these Final Four games, and can't wait to cover it here following the bye week, starting with the road contest against Cincinnati, where Jeff Koonz takes over as defensive coordinator for the Mountaineers, and they try and finish out the season strong. We'll be talking about it here on the CRW, but that's in the future. For now, it's a wrap on episode 205. Appreciate you guys. As always, I'm Jordan Cruz, and until next time, let's go Mountaineers.
If you really want to know, then come on, let's go. Take a stroll down those